Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today we're talking about how much pressure every team is under to perform in the 2025 NBA season. We're going to be doing this on a scale of 0 to 10. If you get a 10, you're under basically as much pressure as possible. If you get a 0, there's no sweat at all. You could be the worst team in the NBA, and honestly, that might be a good thing. And the best way to do this, I thought, was on a tier list. I put the tiers together like this. 10, as I said, is do or die. 0 to 1 is no pressure. And we've got high, decent, not much, and very little in between. And of course, as I rank every team on this tier list, I will also give you an explanation as to why they're there. There will be timestamps down below in the description and chapters throughout the video if you want to find your favorite team, but for the moment, let's just go ahead and get into it. Also, leave a like and subscribe if you do enjoy, as this fly is deciding to interrupt my video. I want to begin with the Atlanta Hawks right here first. And for them, I think I'm going to go not much pressure. There is some, because I'm sure Trae Young wants to see them at least be a decent team. If that's not the case, if they're really, really bad, then there is a real chance that Trae Young requests a trade after this season, or at least rumors may start to circulate, although that might be the path they need to go down to ultimately rebuild and get back to being competitive. So yeah, no one's really expecting that much from the Hawks. It's just like, at least be a play-in team or around the realm of the play-in, show Trae Young there's some promise, or I guess if you want to trade him, then deal him away. But otherwise, they're just kind of chilling this season, especially after getting rid of DeJounte Murray. I guess a little bit of pressure too on Jalen Johnson to continue to improve. Next up are the Boston Celtics. They're going to go to an 8 or 9. There is high pressure when you're the reigning champions, but they have won a championship at the very least. If they lost this past season in the finals to the Mavericks, it would be a 10, maybe even up to 11, because they had made all those moves and they couldn't get it done even with those big acquisitions after running away with the East. They would be on fraud watch, but they won the championship. Now, there is going to be big scrutiny if they don't repeat or at least show a lot of dominance again, but they got one done. You can't say they're a 10 out of 10 because they have won the finals now. They could lose this year. It's a better Eastern Conference. The Western Conference improved as well. And, you know, maybe teams are healthier throughout their run. So, yeah, people are going to say the Celtics are frauds if they don't repeat, but they got a championship. The Nets, the definition of no pressure at all. This team is maybe a -1 if there ever was that. Probably the only pressure is for Cam Thomas to continue to show some improvements, like some of the other young guys, like a Noah Clowney, a Jalen Wilson, guys like that. Just show that you can be a core piece to this team. But even that doesn't really matter that much because they're still at very, very, very early stages of this rebuild. They got their pick back, which is huge for them. The pressure really, if there is any, is to be the worst team in the NBA. Like, if you rack up too many wins before you trade away Cam Johnson and Dorian Finney-Smith, it could be a disaster, because it could be the difference between you getting Cooper Flagg and landing at like the 5th or 6th overall pick, which in a stacked draft class isn't the worst thing, but you want the number 1 guy. If you're Brooklyn, that's why you went out there and traded for your pick back, and I think they're going to have a good chance to go ahead and grab that. For the Bulls, I'm going to say very little pressure. Unlike the Hawks with Trae Young, they don't have that big-time star that they're still trying to figure out what to do with. Like, I guess Zach LaVine fits in that mold, but everybody knows the goal is to move on from Zach LaVine. There's no mystery around him like there is with Trae Young. For the Bulls, the pressure is just to kind of, in my opinion, continue this rebuild. Put the young players in positions to succeed. You know, what are you going to do with the guard rotation with Giddey and Kobe and Ayo Dosunmu and Dalen Terry? And what is Zach LaVine going to look like? Is Lonzo Ball going to be back? And I feel like there is pressure probably from the front office to show a little bit of fight at the very least. Like, don't be the worst team in the NBA. But in my opinion, that's perfectly fine for them to do that, because they want to go out there and get a top pick. They're in this rebuilding stage, or at least entering it. You know, what does Modest Buzelis do this season? What do you get from Patrick Williams? So there are some young players that kind of need to show something this season. Like, Josh Giddey has to show that he's more than this past bad season with the Thunder if he wants a big-time extension this season in free agency when he's a restricted free agent in the summer. So, yeah, we'll see what happens there, but the Bulls, nobody's really expecting that much from them. For the Clippers, I think I'm going to put them in do or die. For the Clippers, this is it. I mean, I think last season was it, if you ask me, but they're trying to maintain the fact that they still believe they can be competitive. They have Kawhi Leonard still. They have James Harden. They added like Derrick Jones Jr. They've got good pieces, basically. I don't think this team is a contender in the Western Conference. I feel like they're going to be a play-in team at best. But for the Clippers, with the new arena opening, and this is James Harden's one of his last chances to try and go out there and get a ring. He is declining. Kawhi's got to show that he can still be a top-tier player, or at least stay on the court at the very least. The Clippers have traded all their assets. They have to try and find some way to make this work. I don't think they will, but basically they have reached the pinnacle of pressure. If this season they're highly disappointing, if they're a playing team, if they miss the playoffs even, what does Kawhi do? Does he decide to leave, or is he cool with just chilling with mediocrity? What happens with James Harden? The Clippers, Raptors have been at a 10 for the past few seasons, and it feels like it's just going to stay that way for this year. For the Hornets, I think I'd put them at not much pressure, maybe up to decent pressure. I'll put them at not much, just because I don't think anybody's anticipating the Hornets are going to be like that good. But in my opinion, they are certainly a threat to make the play-in. And if they really upset somebody in the play-in tournament, they could end up as a playoff team. The pressure on them is to just show improvement, with Brandon Miller having a great rookie season going into his sophomore year, and LaMelo Ball, when he's on the court, being really good. There's honestly maybe the most pressure out of anything with this Hornets team is for him to stay on the court this season. Same thing with like a Mark Williams. I like the moves they made at the deadline last year. I didn't like Trey Mann and Vasily Micic and Grant Williams and Josh Green throughout this past couple months. Like, they have done a good job of bringing some decent supporting pieces for their young core. It's just time for them to put it together, because if they don't start to do that, maybe you have to ask some questions like, say LaMelo can't stay healthy. Do you consider moving off from him and trying to find another young piece, or is just Brandon Miller like the guy going forward? Maybe that even is the case, even if LaMelo is healthy. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, there is pressure because they need to show some signs of improvement, but no one thinks they're a championship contender. For the Cavs, I'm going to say there's decent pressure. They're not quite at the level of the Celtics, mainly because they got Donovan Mitchell back. Like, he signed an extension. Last year, it was an 8 or a 9 to show him something. Now that he signed that extension, they can kind of relax a little bit. Now, they do still need to perform. They just won a playoff series. They don't want to regress, and they ultimately want to compete in the Eastern Conference with the best of them. But in my opinion, there's going to have to be some type of roster shakeup if they eventually want to make that happen. I just don't think the team is currently constructed can compete with the best of the best in the East. It's just a little bit clunky. But the Cavs are going to be a good team. I think everybody expects them to be a playoff squad, fight for a top 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. If they can do at least that, it'll be a fine, successful season. But ultimately, it's just going to come down to, do they make moves this season? Are they willing to do that? Will they wait till the offseason? But the fact that the Donovan Mitchell extension is out of the way takes a lot of the heat off what otherwise would have been the last season for him with this team, most likely. For the Nuggets, I'm going to give them an 8, put them in that same tier as the Celtics. They're also coming off a recent title. They were the champions in 2023, did it in dominant fashion. Last year took a bit of a step back, losing in the second round to a Minnesota team who was kind of constructed to beat them. So it's not the end of the world. They're right there in a game 7. But there is definitely pressure when you have the best player in the world. People are going to expect him to perform, for the Nuggets to show they are still the cream of the crop in the Western Conference, especially after losing KCP. People are expecting a downturn. They got to show that they still have it. I think they will showcase that they're really good, but there is a real chance of regression. And if that happens, a lot of questions pop up about, do you eventually try to move one of your core pieces like a Aaron Gordon or Michael Porter Jr. or even Jamal Murray to improve the roster around Jokic? How do you improve the depth? There are concerns. There is some heat on their seat, but overall, having a title a couple years ago makes it a lot less scary for them. For the Rockets, I'm going to put them at about a 6. They've been a non-playoff team for quite a few years now. They had a bunch of years at the bottom of the barrel. Last season was a big improvement, especially towards the end of the year, where Jalen Green starts popping off and they rapidly approach a play-in spot. Almost overtook the Warriors, but it was just too little too late. This season, I think a lot of Rockets fans have playoff expectations, and it feels like it's attainable with this team. A lot of people are picking them to be like the pop-off team this season, the breakthrough squad in the NBA. I'm not quite buying into the fact that they're going to be like one of the best teams in the Western Conference, but between the depth and the fun young talent, that could definitely improve. I think a playoff berth is definitely not out of the question. Front office is probably hoping for it. And with veteran pieces, young players that have expectations now, like Alperen Şengün and Jalen Green's going to show that last year, the end of the season wasn't a fluke. There is certainly some pressure on this team, even if it's not a ton. With the Lakers, I'm going to put them in the do or die tier. They maybe have a little bit more room for failure than like a Clippers because they won a championship in 2020. But at the same time, you're the Lakers. You are the biggest brand in almost all of sports. You've got LeBron James, one of the biggest names in the history of the game, on your team. You've got Anthony Davis. You brought in JJ Redick. A lot of people are going to scrutinize that if things start to go poorly. And plus, with LeBron getting up there in age, you are the team that is responsible with helping him get at least one final ring going into eventual retirement. And there is always still a chance he walks before the end of his career. You don't want that to happen. You want to help Anthony Davis when he's getting older, and going from Western Conference Finals in 2023 to first round exit this past year is not a great look. You've been a back-to-back playing team. You have to show some improvement. And after doing nothing in the offseason, clearly you believe in this team. So the Lakers, in my opinion, have a ton of pressure. It's amplified by the market they're in, and the fact that also there are some people who scrutinize that 2020 ring, saying it was Mickey Mouse or whatever. I don't subscribe to that, but I guess it's something that is out there. For the Milwaukee Bucks, I think they're also up here at a 10. With Giannis's contract having a few years left, maybe you think it goes down a little bit, but if you don't show some promise, and I just made a whole video about this, so you can go ahead and watch it if you want more in-depth explanation, but if you don't show any promise this season, you have to start to think about like, where does this duo go from here? Because Chris Middleton's an impending free agent, Brook Lopez is an impending free agent, and Giannis has said before in the past he wants to be a Bucks lifer, but if he has to walk to win championships, he will do so. So Dame needs to show a lot. They have to show that hiring Doc Rivers wasn't a mistake. I'm convinced it was. So yeah, Bucks also up here in do or die. Miami Heat, also high pressure. I think I'll go with an 8 or a 9. I don't have a lot of expectations personally for the Miami Heat, but I know a lot of people do. I know Heat fans do. They're expecting this team to put something together. I just don't think the roster's up there with the caliber of some of the best in the Eastern Conference. The big source of pressure is that Jimmy Butler's a free agent after this season, and if he walks for nothing, you're in a really bad spot. If you're Miami, you need to try and retain him, or if you're not going to retain him, trade him for something to help Bam Adebayo out. He's an all-star level talent, an all-NBA level talent, if you ask me. He deserves better than this. Jimmy Butler deserves better than the lack of moves they've been making. Pat Riley's kind of just sat on his hands, and it's resulted in a Heat team making some miraculous runs, but never getting over the hump. If they don't do it now, it's probably their last chance. Dallas Mavericks also going to be up here in high pressure, probably at an 8 if I had to pick it, because even if they don't win it all this season, like Lively's really young, you've got Luka locked up for a few years, Kyrie doesn't feel like he's regressing majorly anytime soon, and you did just make some moves, maybe some of them don't quite work out the way that you thought. You have ways to maneuver this team still theoretically, even if it's not a ton. So yeah, Mavericks have high pressure. I mean, when you're the team that just went to the finals and added a guy like Klay Thompson, you're going to be looked at as one of the favorites to win the West, win the NBA Finals. They got to put something together, especially when Luka is in best in the world conversations. For the Pelicans, I'm between high pressure and decent pressure. I think I'll go high pressure, put him at about an 8, just because they made the DeJounte Murray trade. You know, Zion is really good this season, but now there's question marks about if he's ever going to stay healthy, because even this year where he was on the court a lot and looked great in that playing game, he ended up getting hurt, and they really could have used him against the Oklahoma City Thunder. It wouldn't have resulted in a 1 series, but it would have been more competitive. Brandon Ingram, there's pressure on him and the team to figure out that whole situation. Do you trade him? Do you let him stay on this team in a longer-term contract, even if you don't feel good about him paying that money? Does the DeJounte thing work? You don't have a big man. What happens there? There are a lot of question marks, and if Zion can't stay on the court, do they just consider trading him and moving on? Because at that point, when is he ever going to be healthy? It's a big season for a lot of people in this Pelicans team, so it feels like the pressure is pretty high. For the Knicks, I'm going to put them also in this high pressure tier. I know a lot of people are going up here, but it's just kind of the nature of the NBA right now. They're going to go at an 8 if I've got to give it a specific number score, just because it's the first season that they've had this squad together with Brunson and McHale and OG and Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson, who we just learned today, by the way, is going to be out until December or probably January, which is a big problem for them because they don't really have a solid backup big, or now I guess a starting big. It's like Precious Achiuwa and Jericho Sims. I still think they're going to have to address that at some point during the season. But yeah, like, you gave up a ton for OG Anunoby, you gave up a ton for Mikal Bridges. You've built probably the best Knicks team of my lifetime, and being in New York, people are going to expect big things. They want to see this team perform. They were almost a conference final squad. There are championship expectations on this Knicks team. Now, if they do fail, you could be like, okay, maybe we trade Julius Randle to kind of shake this thing up. Like, there are still ways they can maneuver this team. They have a lot of picks, so it's not like do or die. But with the way that Knicks fans are looking at this team, and I'm looking at this Knicks team, they definitely have to perform at a high level this season to show the trades that they made, the big acquisitions, were worth it. Then we've got my Thunder. I think it's pretty clear they're also up here in high pressure. They would get an 8 if you ask me, because they're really young. Like, if this season it doesn't work out, they made a couple of big additions. You're like, okay, more playoff experience even if they don't win a championship. They've got such a long runway ahead of them, but they were just the 1 seed. They brought the eventual Western Conference champs to 6 games. They added Caruso, Hartenstein, and they're being picked by a lot of people to win the West. They're probably the favorites to win the Western Conference right now, so that comes with massive expectations. Even if you do have a lot of room to still improve as a young squad, you got to perform, and I have these expectations too. I have mentioned a couple of times the Thunder are my favorite in the Western Conference. You know, you have to wait and see if I predict them to actually win the whole thing, but yeah, Thunder, people are looking at them to really step up and elevate this season. I believe that they will. For the Magic, I'm going to say decent pressure because they kind of put it on themselves last season. They were a team that almost won a playoff series, which a lot of people were not expecting from them. They have a young rising star in Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs. They added KCP. People are expecting this squad to be pretty good. Now, if they take a bit of a step back because they're a young team, I'm not saying, oh, it's all doom and gloom, it's all over for them, because, again, they were extremely young, and that's just kind of the nature of the sport. A lot of teams in the East got better as well, but I do think the Magic are going to be really fun. I think Paolo's going to be around an all-NBA level player this season. Just it's no rush for the Magic. No one's expecting them to be a championship contender. They can kind of relax, take this thing slow, make some big acquisitions when the time comes around. But for the moment, they're just kind of feeling this thing out and letting Paolo Banchero rise to superstardom. With the Blazers, I'm going to put them at a 1. They're pretty low in pressure. There's a little bit because it's like, hey, it would be nice if Scoot showed a lot of promise this season. And same thing with like a Shaedon Sharpe and, can Robert Williams stay healthy? And what's going on with DeAndre Ayton? Like, there are questions to be answered about this Blazers team, but it's all going to be in pursuit of Cooper Flag or whoever they get towards the top of the draft. So yeah, there's minuscule pressure, but it's very, very minuscule. For the Pacers, who are the only team for some reason who isn't a PNG file, I'm going to put them at decent. I won't put them at high pressure because they're also kind of like I was talking about with like the Magic, a younger team. It's Tyrese Halliburton. It's recently added Pascal Siakam, who's a bit older, but like this is their first full season together as a duo. It's Aaron Nesmith and Benedict Mathurin and Andrew Nembhard. This is a team that not a lot of people, if anybody, are picking to win the Eastern Conference. I think a lot of people are thinking they're going to take a bit of a step back just in terms of their playoff performance, and not a lot of people are picking them to again be a conference finals team, although I think it's possible. So yeah, there are expectations because when you make the conference finals, of course there are. But yeah, if they have a bit of a step back season, if it's not the same year as last season, I'm not panicking on them whatsoever. For the Pistons, they're actually going to go also, I think, in decent pressure, which maybe feels a little bit crazy because they were just the worst team in the league and had an insane losing streak. But at some point, things have to turn around. If they, again, are one of the worst teams in the NBA, they're a bottom feeder, you really have to start to call into question everything about the franchise. I mean, they brought in a new GM, they brought in a new head coach. If you're bad again, what do you think about doing? Do you just rebuild your rebuild? Where do you go from here if it's again a disaster of a season? They added Tobias Harris, who's a complimentary good player. They added Tim Hardaway Jr., who's not great, but he's going to give them some shooting. Cade Cunningham, there's pressure on him to elevate this team to get better and better as that former unanimously looked at number 1 overall pick. Like, there are some question marks, I guess, but he was the pretty much consensus number 1 pick. There is decent pressure on this Pistons team, if you ask me, which is, again, crazy to say for a team that was just had their worst season ever, but you got to perform at some point. For the Kings, I'm going to put them, I think, in high pressure. They're between a 7 or an 8 for me. I'm going to put them here just because of the threat of another playoff drought. They went through one that was historically long. They made it back to the playoffs in 2023 and then missed again this past year. They want to show that they weren't a one-year fluke, and I'm sure fans are terrified of that being a possibility. You also have the fact that they added DeMar DeRozan, one of the biggest acquisitions of the offseason, so you want to see some performance there. You want to see Fox and Sabonis keep getting better as a duo. What are you going to see from Keegan Murray in year 3? So there are expectations on the Kings for sure, and if they disappoint this year, I can imagine the front office won't be super happy. For the Phoenix Suns, it's a 10, no-brainer. I mean, last season they were a team that was swept in the first round after adding Bradley Beal, having a big 3 of him, KD, and Devin Booker. They've got to prove something this season. Otherwise, does KD think about leaving? What do you possibly do? There's like no way to upgrade this roster. You already brought in a new coach with Mike Budenholzer. If you are not one of the best teams in the Western Conference, this is a disaster of a season. And if they have another first-round exit, I don't even know what's going to happen. The team might implode in on itself. They went all in, maybe more all in than anybody has gone in quite some time since like the Nets did it back when they traded for like KG and Paul Pierce. They have to do or die this season. For the Spurs, I think I'm going to put them in very little pressure. There's like some because people are expecting big things from Wemby, and there's a lot of people saying, oh, could they be like a sneaky play-in team? I'm not expecting that. I think Wemby's just going to continue to be a monster. They'll miss the play-in. They're just still a year away. If you ask me, they need a little bit more talent, and Wemby's going to be ridiculous this season. I think that's pretty much a given. So yeah, I'm not thinking there's that much pressure. Like if Wemby, I guess, has a bit of a regression season, maybe it ramps up a little bit. But for the moment, it's just let Wemby continue to develop into the superstar game-breaking player that he's going to be as soon as this season, and eventually he'll get the talent around him to be a game-breaking team. For the Sixers, this might be the highest pressure team in the entire association. It is the definition of do or die for the process. They've got to make something happen. Now, if they lose this year, it's not the end-all, be-all, like they can still compete going forward, but they've got to show something. You cannot be another second-round exit with Joel Embiid on the roster. You added Paul George, you have Tyrese Maxey still, you've got good supporting pieces. This may be the best Sixers team of the Embiid era. I would say that it is, especially when you consider the fit. Like you look back to that 2019 team with Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris, like that team was good, but the fit was a little bit clunky. There wasn't as much depth. And this version has Joel Embiid, who is an MVP top 5 player. You have to perform. If you don't, you start thinking about like, is Daryl Morey the guy to build this team? How do you build around Joel Embiid? Is there even a way? If guys are injured, you think, can this team ever be healthy? The Sixers maybe have the most pressure out of anybody. At least make a conference finals, and then we can talk about the future going forward with this team. For the Raptors, I'll say, I guess, very little pressure. I could honestly maybe even go no pressure. I'll go very little, though, just because You do want to see improvement from Scotty Barnes, him continue to show that he can be your number one guy going forward. You want to see continued growth from like Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett. And I think this team could be a play-in squad. If they're like awful this season, you might start to question if you need to blow it up a little bit more, if the pieces you have in place right now are the right ones to start this retooling with, this, I would say, rebuilding era, even though maybe the Raptors front office wouldn't look at it quite that way. So yeah, there's like a little bit of pressure, but I mean, they're a plain hopeful team. You can't really say there's that much. For the Jazz, I'm going to say no pressure. It's really no heat on them. They're going to be one of the worst teams in the Western Conference. Like, they'll probably go in a fire sale of some kind. They'll trade some of their veteran pieces. It'll be a season where they're going after Cooper Flagg or someone in this draft. I guess there's pressure to show something to Lauri Markkanen, show that he made the right choice, re-upping with this team on his extension going forward, but you can still consider trading him even if he wants to walk after the season. So yeah, not much pressure on them at all. And I'll just go ahead and get them out of the way. Same thing with the Wizards. No pressure. They're a 0. I guess you want to see Jordan Poole maybe step up a little bit and Alex Sarr to show that he's not a bust after a terrible summer league. But even if like Alex Sarr is bad this season and Poole's bad, all in all, that's probably a good thing for them to go out there and grab that number 1 overall pick if possible. They're tanking outright. It's still the very early stages of their rebuild. So yeah. For the Warriors, I think it might be do or die time. Or do I put them in high pressure because they've won a number of rings? I'm going to put them in do or die, I think, just because you have Steph Curry. You've got one of the greatest players to ever play the game. You lost Klay Thompson. You let him go and really didn't try to bring him back. You added some pieces that you think will make you better. You've got some young players. Like, this is the vision that they've constructed for this team. Show that it's going to work. If this team is really bad this season or just doesn't meet any expectations, if they're not a playoff team, if they're nowhere near the top, you have to start to question if Steph Curry considers asking out at some point or being like, hey, get me more help or I am going to ask out. You're reaching the end of his career and Draymond's. You want to get the best player in your franchise history one more ring. So yeah, I think there is massive pressure on the Warriors. It's up there with the top teams. So I'm going to leave that there. For the Grizzlies, I'm going to say there's just decent pressure. I don't think it's anything too insane. This is the first year back from a completely eradicated season by injuries. Plus, you've got injuries coming into the season, like G.G. Jackson is going through something. How is John Morant going to look after missing a lot of the year? Jaren Jackson and Desmond Bane had a very on and off year playing in the lineup. Marcus Smart, what's he going to look like? The team, I think there still is a vision that needs to be carved out for it. It'll happen throughout the season. There is like a little bit of one, but it's nothing too drastic. They could either be one of the top contenders in the Western Conference or right there on the fringe. I wouldn't be surprised. They're kind of a wild card team if you ask me. So yeah, if they disappoint this season, it's nothing too crazy. It'll just be kind of a question of, okay, what do we need to do? This almost feels like a bit more of a feel it out season than a do or die season for the Grizzlies. And finally, the Minnesota Timberwolves, there's high pressure when you are a Western Conference Finals team, when you have a guy of Anthony Edwards' caliber, you've got Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns, you're a hyper-talented roster. You're going to have high pressure. I put them probably about an 8 or a 9, probably about a 9, because you're starting to reach a point where the salary is going to become impossible to manage consistently. They are reaching a moment where they might have to make a big decision and trade a Jaden McDaniels or trade a Karl Anthony Towns or something like that. This is going to be a big year for them trying to compete at the highest level, win a championship before those tough decisions come, and if they don't win that championship, the tough decisions are going to come along. And even if they do, just with the way the CBA is set up, they're going to have to trade somebody within the next couple of years. This is a season where maybe you feel out who that guy could be. But yeah, this is my tier list. I'm trying to decide if there's anything I want to shift. Like, part of me is considering moving someone into the not much pressure tier because it's kind of thin at this moment. I think I'll just leave it like this. We'll just leave it like this. I might change things if I think about it for a little bit longer. But yeah, let me know down below in the comments what your thoughts are on this tier list. Who would you move and where would you put them? Who's under the most pressure in the NBA going to the season? Do you agree with me that it's probably the Sixers? Clippers, I think, are also up there too, like the Bucks, the Suns. I think these are like the top 4 teams. Probably Suns are second, I guess, when I think about their current situation. But let me know what your thought is on that whole conversation down below. Like I said earlier, leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. And yeah, I appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real One, say it back.